It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. It's October, and that means that we need to do some spookier monster movies. Now, don't ever say that I ever let you down when it comes to the spookiest month of the year here on Monster Mondays. Last year, we went heavy on the first 4 Christopher Lee Dracula entries from Hammer Film Productions. That was ripe with some spooky gothic business, so much so that I wanted to do it again, but differently. There are still 3 or I guess 4 Hammer Dracula movies left to cover, but I wanted to do more Hammer and give Drac a break for the moment. But seeing how this is Hammer, we're not giving Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing a break. Oh no. They will make their appearances here this month. So, welcome to Hammer Halloween on Monster Mondays. This week, we're going to look at one of the earliest Hammer horror hits. It's not the first Hammer horror movie, but it is the first to kind of dabble with the remaking of the Universal classic monsters. This is the Curse of Frankenstein. Now, the origins of this movie go back to an earlier script brought to Michael Carreras at Hammer to make a movie called Frankenstein and the Monster. This was a project that originally came from producer Max Rosenberg, and it was from a script by Milton Subotsky. Now, I've probably mentioned Rosenberg and Subotsky before. They later on created Amicus Films, who were Hammer's chief rival in the horror business in the 60s. It's possible that both of these guys got kind of screwed. They brought the idea of doing a Frankenstein movie to Carreras. I don't know if they were ousted relatively quickly, or they certainly were not involved after a little while. And a new writer, Jimmy Sangster, came in to write an adaptation of the novel Frankenstein, and it was called The Curse of Frankenstein. Now, Sangster never really said if he ever saw Subotsky's script, and claims that he had no idea that Rosenberg was involved in any way. Sangster also claims that he never saw any of the Universal Frankenstein pictures. Any of those claims could be true or utter bullshit, but I'll give it a pass. Sangster was a production manager in a past life and was aware how much a completely blown out Frankenstein movie could cost. He cops to the idea that he wrote the script with budgetary limitations in mind. He purposely didn't want the townsfolk coming out en masse to get the creature. It would be too expensive, and it wouldn't do much but copy other adaptations. Sangster claims to have simply adapted Mary Shelley's novel as he saw it, and it really ended up working out quite well. Now, here's something most people didn't realize. Peter Cushing, playing Dr. Frankenstein, had been in movies, but was mostly a high-profile television actor at the time. The Curse of Frankenstein was his first lead role in a film. Christopher Lee's casting was mostly due to his height, as it's usually well known that Frankenstein's monster should probably be pretty tall and or lanky. Speaking of another high-profile British TV actor, at least he would be 10 years after this film, but it's said that Patrick Troughton, the man who played the second Doctor on Doctor Who, had a brief role, but it was ultimately trimmed out of the finished movie. Now, a couple of more notes here before we get into the breakdown of the action of this movie. This movie was released in May 1957, and it received an X certification from the British censors. It was made out of what would be about $270,000 in the U.S. and grossed about $8 million. So it was a huge success, but it did get that X rating. The movie is basically told in flashback. A priest is taken to a prison where Baron Victor Frankenstein wishes to tell his tale before his execution. He explains that as a teenager, his mother died and he was left with everything in the Frankenstein fortune. He's quite the rich little snot now. He becomes tutored by a scientist named Paul Krimp. They had an intense 2-year study, but they continued to work together beyond the regular time frame that a tutor would typically stay with a student of this age at least. Soon their studies started pointing to another experiment, resurrecting dead things. After successfully bringing a dead puppy back to life, Frankenstein decides that maybe the next thing they should do is go out and get a bunch of body parts and build a perfect human being and give him life. Frankenstein tries to convince Paul to go along with him, but Paul is pretty hesitant. He's not so sure they should be messing about with nature and playing God. And Frankenstein kind of rightfully points out that, hey, we've already kind of spat in God's eye by bringing that dead puppy back. So they go out and start collecting body parts. Starting first, just like with the Universal Classic, by nabbing a hanged man. I think he was like a robber or something. The only problem is that the birds had already kind of gotten to his eyes, so they'll have to get some more body bits. I should mention that Frankenstein's lab and what is used to kind of place the corpse in for the experiment is a big tank of water. Now, exactly what the liquid is, it's not really ever said, but it does. It was basically what the Rocky Horror Picture Show had, where Rocky was wrapped up in and basically placed in this tank, and when Frankenfurter uses that tank to kind of bring life to his creation, a perfect man, I might add, which is what Frankenfurter was out after, it's basically the same goal as Frankenstein's in this movie. Now, things get a little testy between Paul and Victor as Victor goes out and gets more body parts, gets more obsessed as he ever had been before, and his cousin, and what we don't realize at first is now his fiancée, Elizabeth, has come to stay. Paul decides that he should try to get out of working on this experiment to kind of protect Victor and Elizabeth. He's basically trying to say to Victor, it's like, man, you're going to be, called a heretic, basically. And Elizabeth is way too young to process what's going on. And without giving any kind of details, Paul begs for Elizabeth to leave. But he is not aware that what she reveals is that she's arranged to be married to Victor. This makes it all that much more of a problem. And speaking of problems, Victor and his maid are lovers, too. Apparently, he doesn't remember the arranged marriage to his cousin, or at least doesn't let on that he knows anything about it. And also, everything I just said about arranged marriages to cousins is kind of weird. But Victor needs a brain, and a good one, too, for his monster. So he invites the renowned Professor Bernstein over for dinner with him and Elizabeth. He fakes an accident that sends Bernstein through a railing and falling to his death. He has the good professor interned into the Frankenstein family crypt, and then Victor sneaks in and takes the brain. Paul knew that Victor is up to no good, and even though he doesn't have any kind of evidence that Victor killed Bernstein, he's pretty sure that something's not right here. And the two men end up wrestling, and the jar that has the brain in it breaks and pretty much ruins the brain, or at least gives it brain damage. Paul once more tries to get Elizabeth to leave, but again, she refuses. So, on one stormy night, Victor is ready to basically bring the creature to life. However, without a second person, he can't really operate all the machinery with the right timing, so he goes to ask Paul for help. Paul is not having it. But the storm continues on, and it appears that either something with the lightning, either it strikes the building or strikes nearby, it causes the machinery to come back on, and it ultimately gives the creature life. The creature immediately attacks Victor and nearly kills him, but Paul saves him. The creature's brain is absolutely damaged and therefore does not act as Victor intended. But Victor thinks that maybe he can operate on the creature's brain to fix it the next morning, but that is already too late as the creature escapes overnight. The creature then encounters a blind man in the forest and kills him. Paul and Victor ultimately find the creature roaming around in the forest, and Paul shoots and apparently kills the monster by shooting him in the face. But after Paul leaves, Victor decides to go get the creature that they buried and give it life again. Victor's problems begin to mount as Justine the maid finds out that he's going to marry Elizabeth. He basically laughs at her, tosses her aside, and then she says that she's pregnant. He then tries to slut-shame her, but she says that she'll find out the details of what's going on in the lab and tell everyone. She finds out, all right. She goes into the room the creature is being kept in, and Victor locks her in, and the monster kills her. Weeks pass, and Paul finally returns for Victor and Elizabeth's wedding and is shown the creature with his brain having been operated on. But by this stage, the creature is much more docile and obedient, but Paul is angered by how stupid and useless this poor creature is. It's not really living life. It's kind of like it's been lobotomized. Victor constantly blames Paul for causing the brain damage originally, and then for shooting him in the face, which causes more brain damage. But as the two men fight over the next thing that's going to happen, either Paul revealing what Victor has been up to or not, Elizabeth gets into the lab and follows the creature to the roof, where the creature sneaks up behind her. Trying to shoot the creature, Victor accidentally shoots Elizabeth instead, and it almost looks like he kills her. But in order to kill the creature, Victor throws a lamp on him, which ignites him on fire, and then he falls through the roof and dies back in the lab. Victor concludes the story to the priest, who doesn't seem to believe a word he's been told. Victor is on trial or has been sentenced to death for killing Justine the maid. Paul comes to visit. With him is Elizabeth, but she kind of waits outside. Victor hopes that Paul can prove his story that the creature killed Justine, not him. Paul doesn't corroborate the story, and it basically leaves Victor for the guillotine as a murderer. Paul comes outside and tells Elizabeth that there's really nothing that they can do now for Victor, and the film ends on a shot of the blade waiting to come down on Victor's neck. Now let's get into my 3 things I like about the Curse of Frankenstein. First up, I have to say that Peter Cushing is so cold and calculating and mad all at the same time. He's so creepy and untrustworthy, but he also kind of comes off as fully in command of his faculties. He's just obsessed. There are back-to-back scenes with him and the 2 women in his life. First, Valerie Gaunt as Justine the maid and Victor are kind of making out in the hallway of the estate, and she asks about when they're going to get married, so they don't have to steal kisses and sneak off for sex and whatnot. And he just says, well, why do you think I'll marry you? And he doesn't really necessarily ask this mockingly, but it also is not teasingly either. It's just said in a mannered way, but you know who this is and what he is. He really has no intention to marry this woman. He just uses her like he does the body parts that he's been collecting. Next, he sees Elizabeth, and she says that she would like to assist him in his experiments. And he kind of holds her head up by the chin, kind of studies her features and studies her face and her beauty and says, "You will, someday." And it just made my skin crawl because he's checking out her features to use for potentially another creation someday. It's really, really kind of creepy. Thing number 2 that I like is that this movie is a great example of a fat-free film. A modern movie would likely spend a whole lot of time showing Victor slowly kind of degrading into madness and ghoulish endeavors to regenerate dead tissue. It would likely try to examine the relationship between Victor and his parents, or Victor and Elizabeth. No, it doesn't do any of that. We see Victor at age 15, and then in adulthood, he already seems somewhat damaged, or at least disconnected from humanity. He's kind of a weird little boy, and he very much kind of lords over people, it seems like. But this movie is less than 90 minutes, and it really cooks. We're only given details on the things that we need details for. There are no unnecessary scenes or wheels spinning in the mud. I mean, this is efficient and just extremely well paced. My third thing that I like is the marvelous makeup design of the creature. First of all, the reveal is fairly iconic. Frankenstein comes into the room to see the creature standing there, and as the creature removes the bandages to look at his creator, the camera does like a sped up zoom in to show this rotting gray face with scars, a messed up eye, and a scalp that's been basically stitched onto the rest of his head. The creature looks like something dead. I mean, it's pretty gnarly and really different than anything else you'd find in films of the era. But the thing is that the monster had to look different because Universal tried their damnedest to prevent anything in the Hammer film that would look anything like theirs. So they had to scrap anything that would come too close to Jack Pierce's iconic makeup in the classics. And makeup artist Phil Leakey basically had to created another version of an iconic monster from scratch. But all in all, this is a very good and very creepy and well-acted monster movie. It's a true classic that really propelled Hammer into horror history and pretty much the top of the horror genre for at least the next 15 years. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Now, don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on FilmSeizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Audible, and Spotify. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook, Twitter, and or Instagram to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, head over to my website, www.bmovieanima.com, and you can read a new text article each and every Friday morning. You can also follow B-Movie Anima on Facebook and Twitter by searching for just that, B-Movie Anima. And while you're at it, go to YouTube. You can subscribe to Film Seizure on YouTube, where we upload all of our shows and everything up there. But you can also subscribe to the B-Movie Anima channel, where you can find episodes of the movie hosting show that I do and see a bunch of clips that I grab and use for articles. Be sure to keep coming back through the rest of this year because in about a month or two, I'll have a pretty huge announcement about Monster Mondays that you'll not want to miss. So, until next week, stay spooky.